$28. That was the price of the one-way train ticket from San Francisco, the price of a future Silas Blackwood had carefully constructed on paper. He stood on the platform of the dusty station in Harmony Creek, Nevada, the summer sun of 1878 beating down on his neck. The advertisement he'd placed in the Pacific Chronicle had been plain, honest, and, he'd hoped, appealing. Homestead rancher, 35, seeks a wife of good character. Sober and hard-working. Promises a sturdy home and a loyal partnership in building a life. He had imagined a woman like the ones in town, perhaps a farmer's daughter from back east, with calloused hands and a quiet smile. He expected someone tired of city life, someone who understood the language of drought and hard winters. He had paid for her ticket, a gesture of good faith, and now he waited for the steam engine to deliver his investment. The train hissed to a stop, a great black beast panting in the heat. A few drummers and a family of homesteaders got off, swallowed by the small crowd of townsfolk. Silas scanned the remaining passengers, his heart a tight knot in his chest. Then, the final figure descended the steps. It was not a woman in a calico dress, clutching a worn satchel. It was a person who seemed carved from the shadows of the railcar. They wore black trousers, scuffed black boots, and a black duster that fell to their ankles, unbuttoned despite the oppressive heat. A low-brimmed black hat hid their face, but it could not hide the confident set of their shoulders or the easy way a gun belt was slung around their hips. The pistol it held was no decoration, its handle was worn smooth, the metal gleaming with a functional polish. The figure stepped onto the platform, and the murmur of the crowd died. For a moment, Silas thought it was a man, a gunslinger looking for trouble. But then the figure lifted their head, and the shadow of the hat brim receded. The face was that of a woman, Chinese, with high cheekbones and eyes as dark and sharp as obsidian chips. Her expression was unreadable, a mask of calm assessment as she surveyed the town, the dusty street, and the silent, staring people. She carried no satchel, only a small, tightly wrapped bundle under one arm. Her gaze finally landed on Silas, the only man standing alone, holding a single, wilting prairie flower he now felt foolish for picking. She walked toward him, her steps measured and silent. The dust didn't seem to dare rise around her boots. She stopped a few feet away, and the silence stretched, thick and heavy. "You are Silas Blackwood." Her voice was low, clear, and carried no trace of the nervousness he felt churning in his own gut. It was not a question so much as a confirmation. He could only nod, the flower in his hand suddenly feeling like a child's toy. "I am." She looked from his face down to the wilted flower, and one corner of her mouth twitched, a fleeting movement that wasn't quite a smile. "The advertisement mentioned a partnership?" Silas found his voice, though it came out rougher than he intended. "It did. It mentioned a wife." "A partner is what you need," she stated, her eyes flicking toward the distant, parched hills where his ranch lay struggling for life. "A wife is what you believe you need. They are not always the same thing." She held out a hand, not for him to shake, but to show him the folded, creased newspaper clipping she held. It was his advertisement. He had sent for a helpmeet, a companion to share the burdens of a failing patch of dirt. What the train had delivered was something else entirely. She was a puzzle wrapped in black cloth and smelling of gun oil and the long, hard miles she'd traveled. And as the townsfolk watched, whispering behind their hands, Silas Blackwood knew he had two choices: send her back on the next train east, or take this impossible woman home and face the consequences. He looked at her steady gaze, then at his own trembling hands. The ranch wouldn't survive another season alone. With a deep breath that tasted of dust and defeat, he gestured toward his wagon. The decision, it seemed, had already been made for him. The ride back to the ranch was a study in silence. The woman, who had still not offered a name, sat on the wagon bench as if it were a throne, her posture straight, her gaze fixed on the horizon. Silas tried to fill the quiet once or twice, pointing out landmarks, the dry creek bed, the ridge where the coyotes sometimes gathered, but his words fell flat in the vast, sun-baked landscape. She would simply nod, a small, sharp movement, and the silence would rush back in, thicker than before. His ranch was two clapboard buildings and a barn clinging to the side of a dusty hill. The house was small, the wood weathered to a silver grey. The corral fence was sagging in one corner, and the water trough was perilously low. It was a place of constant, grinding work, a place that had already broken the spirit of two hired hands. He saw it now through her eyes, not a homestead full of promise, but a testament to a man's failing struggle against the land. He pulled the wagon to a halt. "This is it." She slid from the bench before he could offer a hand, landing as lightly as a cat. Her eyes took in everything, from the cracked earth of the yard to the faded paint on the door. There was no judgment in her gaze, only a quiet, unnerving appraisal. "The well?" she asked. "Over there," he said, pointing. "Goes dry some summers if the rains don't come." She walked to it, her boots making no sound. She didn't look in. Instead, she looked at the pump mechanism, the rope, the lay of the land around it. She seemed to be reading a story he couldn't see. "You have trouble," she said, turning back to him. It wasn't a question. Before he could answer, the sound of approaching horses broke the afternoon stillness. 3 riders came over the rise, not fast, but with an unhurried arrogance that set Silas's teeth on edge. He recognized the man in the lead instantly. Fletcher Hammond. Hammond owned the sprawling Double H ranch that bordered Silas's property to the east, and he had made no secret of his desire to own Silas's land as well, mostly for its modest water rights. Hammond was a man who smiled often, a cold, thin smile that never reached his eyes. He reined in his horse, his 2 ranch hands, Wade and Carver, flanking him. His gaze slid over Silas and then settled on the woman in black, a flicker of cruel amusement in his eyes. "Blackwood," Hammond began, his voice smooth as oil. "Didn't figure you for the type to hire on new help. Especially not this kind." He gestured vaguely at the woman. "She's not hired help," Silas said, his hands balling into fists at his sides. "Oh." Hammond's smile widened. "Don't tell me the rumors are true. You finally took out an ad for a wife? And this is what they sent you?" He let out a soft chuckle, and his men joined in, their laughter coarse and loud. The woman remained perfectly still, her face impassive. She watched Hammond not as a person, but as a predator might watch a lesser, noisier animal. "My business is my own, Hammond," Silas said, stepping forward slightly. "What do you want?" "Just making a neighborly visit," Hammond said, his tone shifting. The smile vanished. "Wanted to talk about that fence line near the creek. My boys tell me your cattle have been straying over, muddying up the water source. I can't have that." It was a lie. Silas's herd was barely a dozen head, and he kept them penned far from the disputed creek. This was the opening move, the excuse Hammond always used before making another low offer on the land. "My cattle haven't been near your land," Silas said flatly. "My man Wade here says different," Hammond countered, nodding at the larger of his 2 hands. Wade spat a stream of tobacco juice near Silas's boot. "Maybe your fence needs repairing," Wade sneered. "Or maybe you need a lesson in keeping to your own property." He swung down from his horse, a length of thick rope coiled in his hand. He took a step toward the well. "Might be this pump is drawing more than its fair share. I think I'll just fix it for you." Silas moved to intercept him, but a quiet voice stopped him. "Let him." It was the woman. She hadn't moved, but her voice cut through the tension like a razor. Wade paused, looking at her with a smirk. "What's that, little lady?" "I said, let him," she repeated, her gaze locked on Wade's face. Wade laughed and turned back to the well, reaching for the iron pump handle. In the next second, 3 things happened at once. There was the whisper of leather as the woman's hand moved. There was a deafening crack that echoed off the hills. And there was the clang of metal as the pump handle, severed cleanly from its housing by a single bullet, spun through the air and landed in the dust 10 feet away. Silence. The horses shied, their eyes wide. Wade stood frozen, his hand still outstretched, staring at the stump where the handle had been. Hammond's jaw had gone slack. Carver, the other hand, just stared, his face pale. The woman's pistol was back in its holster before the echo had fully faded. She hadn't appeared to aim. The movement had been fluid, economical, and terrifyingly precise. She looked at Hammond, her dark eyes holding his. "The pump is broken now," she said, her voice still low and even. "You should leave. Before something else gets broken." Hammond stared at her, then at the ruined well, then back at her. The arrogance had been wiped clean from his face, replaced by a mixture of shock and something that looked a lot like fear. He gathered his reins, his movements jerky. "Come on," he muttered to his men. They scrambled back onto their horses, not taking their eyes off the woman. As they turned to ride away, Silas saw Carver's gaze fix on the intricate silver dragon inlaid on the butt of the woman's pistol. He saw the man's eyes widen in dawning recognition, and he heard him whisper a single phrase to Hammond, a phrase that the wind almost carried away. But Silas heard it. "The Red Canyon Tong." Hammond spurred his horse, and the three men galloped away, leaving a cloud of dust and a ringing silence behind them. Silas looked at the woman who stood calmly in his yard. He had wanted a partner to help him fight the land. He hadn't known he would also have to fight men like Hammond, or that the quiet woman he'd met at the station was more dangerous than any of them. The trouble she had spoken of was no longer just his. It was now theirs. That night, the air in the small cabin was thick with unspoken questions. Silas had managed to rig a temporary fix on the well, but the image of the severed handle, and the gunshot that had caused it, was burned into his mind. He sat at the small wooden table, watching the woman clean her pistol with meticulous care. The lamplight caught the silver of the inlaid dragon, making it seem to writhe in the flickering glow. She moved with an economy of motion he was beginning to recognize, every action purposeful and precise. Finally, he couldn't stand the silence any longer. "The Red Canyon Tong," he said, the words feeling foreign and dangerous on his tongue. Hammond's man said that name. She didn't look up from her work, continuing to wipe down the barrel with an oiled cloth. "He has a good memory for stories." "Is that what it is?" "A story." Silas pressed, leaning forward. "You need to tell me who you are. Not what the advertisement said. Who you really are." She finished her task, sliding the cylinder back into place with a soft, decisive click. She laid the pistol on the table between them, a silent declaration. Then, she met his gaze, and for the first time, he saw a flicker of weariness in her dark eyes, a shadow that went deeper than simple fatigue. "My name is Jin," she said. "And I am not an outlaw by choice." She spoke for a long time, her voice a low monotone that belied the harshness of her story. Her father had been a merchant in San Francisco, indebted to the Tong, a powerful criminal organization that ran gambling halls, smuggling rings, and extortion rackets throughout the city. When he couldn't pay, they had taken his debt out on his only family. Jin, skilled with a firearm since she was young, taught by a retired soldier her father had befriended, was more valuable to them than a simple worker. They made her an enforcer. A collector. The silver dragon was their mark, a symbol of their power, a brand on her weapon and her life. "I did what I had to do to survive," she said, her hands resting still on the table. "But I never stopped looking for a way out. A way to a place where no one knew my name or that mark." She reached into a pocket of her duster and pulled out the worn newspaper clipping. She unfolded it carefully and pushed it across the table toward him. The paper was soft, almost cloth-like from being handled so many times. "I read the words," she said, her finger tapping the advertisement. A sturdy home or a loyal partnership building a life. It sounded quiet. Silas looked at the clipping, then back at her. The fierce gunslinger who had faced down 3 armed men without flinching had been drawn in by his simple, desperate words. She hadn't come here to be a wife. She had come here to disappear. "They will not let you go that easily," Silas said, the realization settling like a stone in his stomach. Hammond's man recognized the mark. "The story will travel. They'll send people." "I know," Jin said. "I will be gone by morning. The trouble that follows me is not yours to bear." She stood up, ready to gather her few belongings. But Silas didn't move. He thought of the sagging corral, the failing crops, the crushing loneliness of the past 5 years. He thought of the way she had stood her ground, defending his property, his well. She had brought a new, more dangerous kind of trouble to his doorstep, but she had also brought a strength he hadn't seen in years. For the first time since his father died, someone else was standing with him on this land. "No," he said, his voice quiet but firm. He stood to face her. "You answered the advertisement. It promised a partnership." Jin watched him, her expression guarded. "This is not the partnership you asked for." "Maybe not," Silas admitted. "But you were right. A partner is what I need. You stay. We face them together." It was a reckless, foolish decision. He was a simple rancher. He was offering to stand against a notorious criminal gang for a woman he'd known for less than a day. But looking at her, he saw not an outlaw, but another person fighting a desperate battle for a piece of peace in a hard world. It was a battle he understood. A week passed. A fragile truce settled over the ranch. Jin worked with a tireless, focused energy. She mended the corral fence not with clumsy hammering but with the same precision she used to clean her pistol. She had a way with his skittish horse, a gentle command that calmed the animal better than he ever could. They worked side by side, speaking little, but a rhythm developed between them, a shared understanding born of mutual labor. Silas began to feel a flicker of hope. The hope was shattered when the telegraph came. Silas had ridden into Harmony Creek for supplies. Walter, the young telegraph clerk, flagged him down, his face pale with excitement and fear. "A message came through this morning, Silas," he whispered, handing over a slip of paper. "From a private detective agency in San Francisco. It's being posted in every marshal's office in the territory." Silas read the words, his blood running cold. It was a warrant. A bounty of $500, a fortune, for a Chinese woman named Jin. It described her appearance perfectly, right down to the black duster and the pistol with the silver dragon inlay. The charge was murder. "Murder?" Silas asked, his voice hoarse. "Says she killed a Tong leader before she fled," Walter explained, eyes wide. $500, Silas. A man could buy a whole new life with that. Silas looked at the paper in his hand. $500 would solve every problem he had. It would buy a new well, a new herd, new equipment. It would free him from the debt that was slowly strangling him. All he had to do was ride back to the ranch, tie up the woman sleeping in his barn, and turn her over to the law. He could be safe. He could be prosperous. He thought of Jin's words, "I did what I had to do to survive." He thought of the weariness in her eyes. He thought of the way she looked at the open horizon, as if it were a door she was terrified might slam shut. He knew, with a certainty that went bone deep, that whatever had happened in San Francisco was not the whole story. He looked at Walter. "Thank you for letting me know." He walked out of the telegraph office and straight to the general store's pot-bellied stove. He crumpled the piece of paper into a ball, lifted the iron lid, and dropped it into the flames. He watched it curl, blacken, and turn to ash. The bounty was a temptation. The danger was real. But the partnership, he was beginning to realize, was worth more than $500. As he rode out of town, he knew his choice was made. He was no longer just a rancher. He was now a man hiding a fugitive. And the storm was coming for them both. They didn't have to wait long. 3 days later, under the bruised purple sky of dusk, 4 riders appeared on the ridge. They were not loud and arrogant like Hammond's men. They moved with a silent, predatory purpose, their figures dark against the fading light. Jin saw them first. She had been watching the horizon every evening, as if expecting them. "They're here," she said, her voice calm. She was already checking her pistol. Silas's heart hammered against his ribs, but he grabbed his rifle from its pegs by the door. "How do we play this?" "There is no play," Jin said, her eyes fixed on the approaching riders. "They are not here to talk. They are here to collect a debt." She looked at him, her gaze sharp and direct. "You can still leave, Silas. Ride out the back way. They want me, not you." I burned the warrant, Jin, he said, chambering around. I'm already in this. Now, what's the plan? A flicker of something, surprise, respect, passed through her eyes. The barn, she said. The hayloft gives us the high ground. The main door is a bottleneck. They'll have to come through it one at a time. They moved quickly, barring the cabin door before sprinting across the yard to the barn. They scrambled up the ladder to the hayloft just as the riders entered the yard. The men dismounted, moving with a coordinated grace that spoke of long practice. Their leader, a tall man with a long, scarred face, walked to the cabin and kicked the door. It held. Jin, the man called out, his voice carrying in the still air. We know you're in there. You killed a brother of the Tong. There is no running from that. Come out, and we will make it quick. When no answer came, he sneered and turned to his men. The barn. She's in the barn. Smoke her out. Two of the men started forward, carrying torches they'd lit from a lantern. This was the moment. Silas rested his rifle on a bale of hay, his sight settling on the lead man's chest. His hands were sweating, but his resolve was firm. Wait, Jin whispered, placing a hand on the rifle barrel. Don't kill them. If you do, the Tong will send 20 more. We have to make them leave. We have to make it too expensive for them to stay. Before Silas could ask what she meant, she stood up. Not in the shadows, but in the wide-open arch of the hayloft, silhouetted against the last light of day. It was a breathtakingly foolish move. The men below stopped dead, their torches held aloft. The leader smiled, a grim, triumphant expression. There you are. I am here, Jin called down. But you have been lied to. I did not kill Brother Chen. The leader laughed. We found him with your blade in his chest. You found him with my blade, yes, Jin's voice rang out, clear and strong. Because he attacked me. And your true leader, why, stood and watched. He killed Chen when he failed, and he used my blade to frame me. He wants me gone because I know he has been skimming from your shipments for years. A murmur went through the three men. The leader's face hardened. Lies. Seize her. But his men hesitated, looking at each other. Jin had planted a seed of doubt. It was all she needed. Why promised you my bounty, didn't he? Jin continued, pressing her advantage. But what about the gold from the last 3 payrolls he was supposed to guard? Ask him where that is. Or you can die here, in the dirt, for a liar and a thief. Enough, the leader roared, raising his own pistol. That's when Silas acted. He didn't aim for the man. He aimed for the torch in the hand of the man next to him. The rifle bucked against his shoulder, and the torch exploded in a shower of sparks and flaming oil. The man screamed, dropping it into a patch of dry brush. Flames erupted instantly, licking up toward the side of the barn. In the confusion, Jin fired. Not at a man, but at the rope holding a heavy block and tackle that hung over the main barn door. The rope snapped, and the heavy iron pulley crashed down, blocking the entrance completely. They were trapped, but so were the Tong. The fire was spreading, cutting off their retreat on one side, and the barn was now a fortress. The leader and his men stared at the flames, then at the blocked door, then up at the hayloft where 2 guns were now aimed down at them. They were caught in a trap of their own making. The leader cursed, a long, vile string of words. He looked at his wavering men, at the growing fire, and at the impossible situation. He had come for an easy collection. This was not easy. This was going to be costly. With a final, hateful glare toward the hayloft, he gave a sharp whistle. Back! We're leaving! They scrambled over the corral fence, retrieved their horses, and rode off into the night, disappearing as silently as they had arrived. Silas and Jin rushed down to fight the fire, using horse blankets and the precious water from the trough. They beat back the flames until they were nothing but smoking, blackened earth. They stood in the dark, breathing heavily, covered in soot, the smell of smoke thick in the air. The barn was scorched but standing. They were alive. "They'll be back," Silas said, his voice raspy. "No, they won't," Jin replied, looking out into the darkness where the riders had vanished. "I gave them a new enemy. A better one. They will go back to San Francisco and tear their own house down looking for a traitor. The trouble is over." 6 months later, the first snows of winter dusted the high peaks. The ranch was transformed. The side of the barn wore fresh, unpainted timber where the fire had scorched it. The corral fence was straight and strong. A new, larger herd of cattle, bought with the profits from a surprisingly good harvest, grazed in the pasture. The well, fitted with a new and more efficient pump Jin had designed, gave water freely. Silas and Jin worked together in the crisp morning air, their movements a familiar, easy dance. They had built this, board by board, day by day. The silence between them was no longer awkward or heavy, it was comfortable, filled with unspoken understanding. The town of Harmony Creek had eventually stopped whispering. They saw the prosperous ranch, they saw the quiet, hard-working pair, and they had simply accepted it. Fletcher Hammond, unnerved by the visit from the Tong, had sold his holdings and moved out of the territory. One evening, as the sun set, painting the sky in strokes of orange and pink, the distant whistle of the train echoed through the valley. A year ago, that sound had filled Silas with a desperate, anxious hope. He had been waiting for an answer to an advertisement, a solution to his problems. He had ordered a wife to save his ranch. Instead, a warrior had arrived, and together they had forged a life far stronger and more honest than the one he had ever dared to imagine. He looked over at Jin, who was watching the sunset, her face calm and finally at peace. The partnership was real. The home was sturdy. And that, he knew, was more than enough. And that brings us to the end of this one. If you stayed with me all the way through, thank you. Stories like this one only get told because folks like you sit down and listen. If you liked what you heard, go ahead and hit that like button. And if you want more stories from the old frontier, subscribe so you don't miss the next one. Until then, take care of yourself, and thanks again for being here.